Hello and welcome to the latest webinar from the She Network. For those of you working in HE Marcoms and professional services, your roles will require you to work closely with your academic colleagues to share information, ideas and work collaboratively. And whilst this may sound straightforward and easy to do, we know that in practice it can be difficult for many reasons. We're here today to break down the silos between academics and professional services for the benefit of all. And I'm so excited to introduce our special guest today. Rachel Reeds is a HE admissions and leadership specialist, and her pioneering book, Surviving and Thriving in Higher Education Professional Services, acts as an invaluable toolkit that offers knowledge and practical advice on how to navigate challenges, upskill, and be confident in your role. Rachel, hello, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
We're also joined today by Professor Peter Wollstonecroft, who is the Faculty Director of Education at Manchester Met University and has vast experience of driving positive change in the roles he's been in, including collaborating with Rachel on the work she's been undertaking to improve how we work together. Peter, how are you today?
I'm absolutely fine. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And finally, a big hello to Louise Wood, fellow She founding member, who will be joining the conversation too. Hello, Louise.
Hello.
Brilliant. Right, let's get stuck in then. And Rachel, I'd like to come to you first. Can you tell us a little bit about your book and what compelled you to write it?
Well, I started writing this book because of the lack of narrative or discussion going on in the sector around professional staff's professional development and lack of recognition of a lot of the challenges that are unique to the higher education sector in terms of navigating the imbalance of power and influence between professional and academic staff, some of the historic structures that we have to work against. And I felt like I've learned a lot in my career, most of it on the job. And when I was looking for resources to direct team members to, there isn't much. There are professional bodies that offer some support. There are skills-based sort of guidance and training, but there's nothing that really says there's a really unique environment you're working in here in higher education, and it's a bit weird and it's a bit old school and it's a bit unpredictable. So, what are the most important skills to navigate in that space? And I very much thought, well, anyone could do this. Why should I do it? And then I thought, well, if no one's doing it, I'll have a go. But it was pretty daunting thinking, oh, how am I going to write 50,000 words? That's a bit much. So I went and found 11 marvelous colleagues from across the UK higher education sector working in different roles, including Peter, who kindly shared their stories, their professional journeys, and gave a rich narrative around what it's like to work in HE, but by offering their ideas and their thoughts and their experience, it became a community of practice. So it's a book, but it's more of a conversation. It's not saying this is the way you do things. It's more, here's a bringing together of lots of common challenges and common strategies that people have found work. And let's build that up into a more empowered professional service community across UK HE, not one that's forever relegated to being the non-academics, defined by what we're not, defined by a negative space, and or worse, support staff. We're all here to support the applicants, academic or professional. Let's leave that one at the door. So I think that for me, the purpose of writing the book itself was very much about positive disruption, about pushing for conversation and challenge and reconsideration space. But also the content of it is hugely powerful to those early in their career or looking to progress or make changes, looking for something else that's outside the institution within which they're currently working.
Fantastic. It's just brilliant that you've taken that project on and actually, you saw a need and you created amazing content and advice. I mean, how has the book been received within the community?
Really well. There's been a lot of interest in it and a real appreciation of the focus on professional staff, because the academic persona is very much the face of higher education, there is an underlying feeling of invisibility, of marginalization. So I think there's an appreciation of, as there are in any space with any group that feels a little bit marginalized, there's an appreciation of visibility and also an accessibility around the book. I think the fact that it's not high level research that's being done. There's important research going on around professional service identities and so on. That's really important work, and it really supports what I wrote in the book. But the book was very much designed to be written as in an accessible way. You don't need to know how to Harvard reference to understand it. You don't need to know leadership theory to follow it. You don't need to know understand even the different hierarchies in higher education and what all the lingo means, because we break a lot of that down. So for me, it's disruptive by just breaking down some of the mask of mystery and elitism that HE sometimes can linger on a bit too much.
I can vouch for how well it's been received, because I had an interesting conversation internally with my PVC for student experience, Dr. Helen Galbraith, who's just written a blog reviewing the book and how it should be core reading. And we've got a professional services conference coming up at University of Chester in July. So yes, we're all going to be getting our copies, so you can see it shining. So yeah, I can vouch for that.
And we will absolutely be sharing a link as well to this book for you all to buy. Peter, you're one of the academic voices in Rachel's book. Why was it important for you to be a part of it?
Oh, I think it's absolutely vitally important. I was looking through some old folders the other day, and I realised that next month is my 25th anniversary of my first class that I taught within higher education. And I was sort of reflecting back and thinking not a lot has changed in many ways in those 25 years in terms of the relationship between academics and professional services. I absolutely, really, really strongly believe that for excellence to happen, everybody has to be excellent. And I never understand this artificial divide between academics and professional services as though one is more important than the other, or that they shouldn't talk. Because actually, if one's excellent and the other one isn't, you're not going to get excellence. You need both to work together. So when I first started teaching, professional services were separated geographically, so they're in a separate building. So actually you had to put on your coat, have a walk down around the campus for about 10 minutes to actually speak to somebody who was not an academic. And in a lot of universities, that's still the case. What happens is that we're not using the expertise of both groups. And it works both ways. I think it's important for both groups to work together. And I think it's something within Manchester Met, we're working really hard to create a community where actually we're one university rather than some sort of separation and something which is very sort of artificial, which I noticed 25 years ago, and frankly in my career has been a common theme.
That one university kind of mentality is such a goal, isn't it, for a university to work towards? But there are still very siloed ways of working. Rachel, in your opinion, how can we better share and celebrate those expertise and build that collaboration? What practical kind of things can be implemented to start that journey?
I think there's one thing that is an important context for that kind of discussion and sort of touches on what Peter was just saying around the division between professional and professional services and academic colleagues. There's a lot of focus on trying to bridge that, really important working, but I also think it's really important to understand that it's not just a cultural, historical division. It is a contractual difference. There are two kinds of contracts on which you're employed, very much in an either or setting in higher education. And as a professional, on a professional contract, professional clerical administrative, whatever they call it, whatever the academic adjacent, whatever word they want to call it, if it's not an academic contract, you do not have the same academic freedoms or flexibilities or freedom of speech fundamentally in your contract as a professional than you would as on an academic contract. So it is really important to recognise the imbalance of power that brings, and the progression routes are very different. So on an academic contract, you can apply for promotion. Your work within your space is recognised and can be rewarded by a higher job role and high salary, whereas in a professional space you have to move roles, that your work is defined by the role, not by your own expertise. So it's important to understand that, and I think actually that's where a lot of people trip up and we get a lot of tension, because there is a lack of understanding of that power differential between those two groups. So it's saying that just because an academic colleague and a professional colleague are on the same pay band, they're not equal. Right, they have different access and opportunities and opportunities to speak. So it's just important to recognise that as kind of a foundation. And ultimately, if we're going to be truly radical about this, that's the fundamental problem. Like until you have contracts that just reflect people's focuses, so ones that are focused on research, ones that are focused on teaching, ones that are focused on student services or whatever it might be, and come away from this binary, it's going to be very, very difficult. There's a lot that we have to do to compensate for that. And so a lot of what I like to do is about awareness, because I think if you don't understand where some of these challenges come from, how can you disrupt them, how can you challenge them, how can you upturn them? But that's also a positive thing, because when you understand some of those differences, you understand some of the frameworks within those colleagues are operating in, understanding the other side, so to speak, and the differences between, help you understand the thought processes that a colleague might be going through or the way they might be approaching it. Peter and I worked together as professional staff member and academic in the past, and when we talked about his contribution to the book, I obviously drew very heavily on the fact that he has spent most of his career trying to bridge those gaps and to educate both sides to work together more collaboratively, but also that he could say things that I couldn't. Right, as someone employed in an academic contract, the things that would be more comfortable for him to say about his fellow colleagues on academic contracts that would feel very uncomfortable, or I would perhaps get more criticism for saying as someone not on an academic contract. So that in itself reflects some of those challenges. For me, it's about understanding and awareness. When you understand better the academic career trajectory, the focus of someone who's come through an academic route, for example, around their research and their teaching, and the metrics that they're being held to around the NSS scores, the National Student Survey, and all their module, questionnaire surveys, that they're being held to all of these metrics. As a professional staff member, you need to understand those to help them navigate problems. You can't just tell an academic colleague you need to do something, one, not explain it, and two, not understand that they have a different set of challenges or expectations around their work as well. So I think there's a lot of the operating silos means everybody's looking away from each other, getting annoyed with each other for not meeting our own expectations without taking the time to really penetrate each other's. But it's a two-way thing, most definitely, not just a one-way feed.
In your role, Peter, does it feel like a two-way thing in your working role?
I think this is absolutely key. Rachel's got to the absolute heart of what the issue is here, and I'm convinced that in most cases it's actually a lack of communication and a lack of understanding that holds people back. I think there's 2 points I'd like to make in this particular area. First of all, I think what's absolutely vital is that we get the various groups talking to each other and understanding what they have to do and the pressures on them. I mean, both roles have their own differing pressures. One isn't more important than the other. They are literally just two different sets of stresses on the person. And actually, I have to say, when I first came into HE, I didn't know what everybody did. And actually, because you're so busy doing all of your bits and pieces, you're preparing your work, you're doing your sessions, you're assessing, you don't really think about what everybody else is doing. It can be a very sort of self-centered profession if you're not careful. And actually, it took a real effort for me to sort of get out of that silo, to talk to people and realize that actually there was a whole group of people who could be incredibly helpful and were actually all trying to do the same thing as I was, just from a different angle. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that the structures of HE are designed to keep the two groups apart if we're not careful. I mean, Rachel's absolutely right about the contracts. I mean, as straightforward as how you were employed. But secondly, in terms of sort of meetings and in terms of the processes that we operate, something we've done within the university, and I think has made a massive difference, is put groups together which include professional services staff and academic staff from the very start of any proposal. So if a new course is being proposed, it goes through various groups which contain representatives from across the university. And what we found is that has been absolutely transformational, because each group comes at it from a different angle and can actually spot any errors and spot any problems at the earliest possible stage. So, you might have the most fantastic idea, and all of your, say, academic colleagues think it's a great idea, and the market research says it's a great idea. But until you've run it past professional services, you need to make sure you don't know whether it's organizationally possible or any problems from a process point of view. And I think from an education perspective, we have a meeting every Monday morning, which includes key people from professional services and from academic services. And it's just looking at each challenge that the university faces, and it's working together rather than just saying it's something from an academic perspective or from professional services perspective. But my experience, that's quite rare. Often the two groups are working in parallel but not in tandem, and that's the thing that we need to break down.
Mm. Louise,
I would just add.
Oh no, go for it.
Sorry. I would just add, particularly thinking about the Marcom's focus of the network, that one of the I suppose biggest challenges I always observe, and I'm going to say this as someone who doesn't work in Marcom's, but admissions is often based in a directorate with marketing communications, so I see a lot of this stuff in action, is that remembering that the business school that you might be battling with over some marketing strategy has got marketing, like Marcom's experts in it. I think that's one of the weirdest things about higher education, is we have all these experts teaching our students, they might be running a marketing undergraduate program, have all this area of expertise, but as much as we might get frustrated with our academic colleagues are thinking, why aren't you using my expertise? We have journalism, experts, creative writing experts. It's a very strange environment to bring all this skill together and be like, but you have to stay over here and do the teaching, and then bring in the professionals. And actually, if we can relax a little bit with our discomfort about some of those boundaries that are there to protect ourselves as anything else as well, and because of recognizing those power imbalances, there's something really rich and innovative that could potentially happen in those spaces.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly chimes with me. I remember my dad, when I first started working in marketing in higher education, he said, well, don't universities have marketing experts? And I was like, yeah, they do, but they're in a totally different. Yeah, but could you not just? And I was, no, it doesn't work like that. And it still doesn't work like that. But you're right, there's just so much rich resource. And if that collaboration can come together, goodness knows where it could go. It's just the thought of it's very exciting.
But this is very much a culture thing. It's a culture issue that actually so much of higher education is done on an individual basis. I mean, I'm looking at it from an academic point of view for just 30 seconds here. In general, an academic will be working on their own. They might work with one or two other people in a module team, but the classroom is their own classroom. The marking is their own marking. They create things themselves. And actually, you have to almost encourage a culture of collegiality and collaboration, because it's not where most academics work from. They tend to work on their own projects, and hence that goes into all of the aspects of their life and on their work, I suspect.
Yeah, so they're working very differently to professional services. Louise, I know you work with many academics in your role. Has anything you've heard kind of chimed with your experiences?
Definitely. And I have to say, I was fortunate to hear Rachel speak back in November, I think it was last year, at the Wonky Festival of Higher Ed. And there were so many things that I took out of Rachel's session. Primarily being a positive disruptor. I loved that. I just thought, yeah, that's got such a good, I don't know, I just found like I really held on to that. And also I think about as we sort of touched on, embracing your expertise and having that confidence that whilst I might not be an academic, I'm skilled and I have qualifications. I've got an undergrad degree, I have a postgrad, I have a professional diploma and years of experience in my field, and therefore I am absolutely justified to be at the table and advising senior colleagues on Marcom's issues. But equally, there are some real issues that we are still grappling with in terms of that mutual respect, I think, and understanding of the situations. And I think that point about having experts in our areas is so true and really untapped, I think, in terms of our sort of marketing and sort of social media, digital marketing teachers, as it were, are within our business school. And so we're working quite closely with them at the moment to look at some of the kind of more innovative ways. We've got experts in AI as well who are able to, that are running workshops for us, so that me as running a communications directorate, I want to understand how can AI help? And we've got those expertise internally, so they're helping. So we are starting to do some of that. I think we need to do much more of it. And like Peter said as well, I think it's understanding some of the limitations that we're working in terms of being, time poor, etc., resources being short, and how do we make sure that any decisions we're making, we are being as collaborative as possible. Have we checked with timetabling? Have we also checked with the states? And do we know about this and about that? So I feel like we're on the turn of something. So hopefully in another, well, maybe not 25 years, shorter than that, I'd like to think, Peter, there would be some change, but which I think is why Rachel's work with Peter's involvement is so timely, because of the situation HE is in at the moment. We only have to read the news each day. That I think it's imperative. It's more important than ever, isn't it, that we work collaboratively for this one university that Peter referred to. So yeah, lots is very recognisable at what Rachel is saying, but there's also some great advice on how we start to navigate that for the better, for sure.
That mutual respect point, and I know something we discussed before this call was getting your voice heard. And this is, I suppose, on both sides, both professional services and academics. How can that environment be created that both sides can get their point across and feel comfortable either agreeing or disagreeing with the other person for a, productive outcome?
When I'm coaching or as a manager, when I come across this challenge all the time, everybody is very aware of their own knowledge and expertise and expects other people to take that as read. But we need to show our workings out. I always say to people, this isn't about justifying why you've made a decision. This isn't defending it. But if you don't explain it, then you're not going to have necessarily the cooperation you're looking for from another colleague. Or if you're saying, no, this is my decision, this is within my remit. And, particularly I work in admissions, and an academic colleague might want to do something with an offer, might want to make an offer to someone that it's not appropriate. If we just say no, we're never going to get anywhere. And you don't have to justify, but explaining. So for me, it's always about evidence, or walking someone through. And some of that is about saying, this is more complicated than you realize. I'm just going to give you the headlines just so you understand the kind of the context of this. But getting defensive is where we tend to fall over, I think, because then everyone digs their heels in. So pre-loading with evidence or information, particularly if you remember, coming from a professional perspective, academic colleagues' entire professional academic training is about critical engagement. Their brains are wired to challenge, to upend, to look at it from different perspectives, to think about it. And they don't, and if you go through some data at someone and just say, this says we've got to do this, and they don't know where the data's come from, why it's come, they're going to ask questions because that's what they've been trained to do. And they're trained to challenge resources, to challenge evidence, to understand where things have come from. So my biggest kind of, I suppose, flagship point is we all just need to explain ourselves a little bit more.
I'd absolutely agree 100% on this. And I think there's a couple of things to also sort of add to this particular argument. I mean, first of all, this whole culture needs to come from the top as well. It has to come from the Vice Chancellor, from the senior leadership team, who have to stress the importance of this equality and stress the importance of explaining and making sure that there is this one university culture. I would secondly add that in some cases, I think titles are not helpful. I mean, I happen to be have a title of professor. That doesn't make me better than anybody else. It doesn't actually sort of make me an expert in every single aspect of universities. I think if you ask me about middle managers in colleges, which is my expertise, I probably do know something about. But in terms of marketing, in terms of admissions, in terms of all of the various aspects of a university, the fact that I have a particular title is completely irrelevant. I don't have the expertise. So I think it's actually making sure that all colleagues have a degree of humility about what they know and what they don't know as well. And I think the tendency in universities is to say, he or she is a professor, or he or she is in a senior leadership role, hence must know what they're talking about. And of course, one would hope that they do in some cases, but not in every case. So I think for me, it's making sure everybody knows what they don't know.
Yeah.
Empowering people to challenge. And that's something that I'm very much a middle manager. So I'm in that sandwich between people above me telling me what to do and people below me saying, why do we have to do that? And trying to, not necessarily having all of the decision-making authority myself, but having to mediate, to moderate, to challenge and in that middle space. So as managers and as team leaders, as heads of department, or as people like Peter says, with those more senior titles that stimulate sort of respect, or people feel that we need to do what they say, those people need to be empowering those in those specialist roles, in those junior roles, to challenge, to say, in this little area I am the expert, and so I am going to challenge, or I'm going to suggest something different, because the hierarchies can work against us in that sense, where just because someone's senior, they do not know more, as Peter said, about necessarily that specific area of focus. And empowering early career professionals and academic colleagues to speak up and to engage with things is so important, because there's higher education is very much that kind of a pivotal moment where there's a lot of space for innovation in any kind of challenging environment. That's often where innovation really comes out, and that's that space. And there are a couple of senior leaders across HE sector in the UK who really are generating some radical shifts, like Damien Page at Bucks New. And then you've got like a Harper Adams, you've got a Vice Chancellor who came through the professional route. They are hugely the exceptions to the rule, but they're doing different things and upending some and showing it can be done differently. So that's really exciting. There's also some new institutions. There's one in Manchester, the name of it escapes me, that's designed in a completely different way. So there are these higher education institutions coming through that are not trying to be a university. They're trying to do higher education in a different way. So that's really exciting. And allowing space for that, like you said, like Peter said, that humility, allowing people to challenge and do things differently, and just watching your team fly and being proud of that without needing to own it or control it is a very powerful space to be, to allow for innovation and change.
I think the whole point about experts and the sort of the workings out. I remember you talking about that, Rachel, about showing your workings out, and I thought that's so important. And Marcel, as you were saying about working in Marcom's roles and then liaising with academics, and there was an example where an academic said, right, I want the course to be called XYZ, and digital marketing were like, I don't think that's really going to work, and they said, no, that's just the way it is. And I'm anecdote, but and of course struggling with recruiting, etc., and well, what are you doing in marketing about it? And actually it came to the point of showing the workings out, showing the data, showing about search engines, showing about actually these are the types of things that people are searching for, not this term, even though it's the same type of course. If you were to use these types of words to describe the course, then you're more like. And then there was okay. And it reminds me, Marcella, of our session with Professor Eunice Simmons about preparedness. Do you remember? She talked so much, and of course she is our Vice Chancellor, she's an academic by background, but in terms of that point you made, Rachel, she really talked about, we were saying to them about voice heard and expertise, and she talked on and on about that preparedness. Don't just go in saying, this is why, and I'm an expert because I've been working in marketing for 20 years. It's like, actually, where's the data behind that and the workings out? So it's quite nice, Marcella, isn't it? Seeing, other webinars and you think, oh yes, other people are saying that. So there's some nice holistic messaging coming through. So that's good.
Yeah, all about preparation.
Yeah.
It got me thinking when you said about there's so much in the news, Louise, obviously many universities in financial deficit, many people's roles, there's uncertainty around the future of their roles, and it's very much dependent on student recruitment. I'd imagine, obviously I don't work in a university, but I'd imagine it can be quite a tense time for many at the moment in critical meetings, and there's probably not that much space for humility if people are stressed and under pressure. I'll come to you first, Rachel. Kind of, how can we do all the things that we've just discussed right now at this time of uncertainty and actually drive change in the immediate?
I think it's more important, don't you, Peter?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely vital. I mean, what's really interesting, it was fascinating listening to what Louise and Rachel were saying. And I think the one worry here is exactly what you're saying. We are at the moment in one of the most critical times for higher education, and empowering people it isn't a massive risk, but it's perceived as a massive risk because you won't necessarily like everything that they say, and they do. And actually, what we're seeing in the sector is this approach, which is becoming more and more resistant to change in a lot of cases. But as Rachel mentioned, as one or two examples, shining beacons who are trying to do things differently. My absolute belief is that to survive in the next few years, we've got to do things in a completely different way. And it does mean we've got to empower people who traditionally have not been empowered. Because if we're reliant on one or two people at the top making the decisions and coming up with the decisions, then actually I think we're doomed. I wrote a blog recently about how decisions are often made in universities, and there was a degree of tongue in cheek, but it's actually very true that often decisions are made on the hoof. So basically, what happens is that you've got a problem. You call to a meeting and you have to come up with a solution. And often what you do is you simply see what other universities are doing and actually just copy what other universities are doing. What I'm always calling for is something that's completely new, and actually working with professional services and working and empowering people means that what you can achieve is something which is radical. And actually, if you're going to survive, you're going to have to be radical, I think, in the next few years.
It's also recognizing that for me, and this is probably quite an inflammatory thing to say, but it's recognizing that senior leadership, whether they mean to or not, use the structural contractual division between academic and professional staff to keep control of some of the big change pieces that they're trying to impose, the very top-down change pieces and staff FTE reductions that they're trying to implement, because they generally focus on one group at a time. So a lot of the narrative here is about losing staff. There'll be a piece, an institution at any one time invariably is either focusing on one or the other. And at the minute, it's more heavily on professional staff. But the second you do that, what you do is you buy, as a senior leadership team, they buy themselves space and time because they've only got to deal with one union group. They know that the other side will knuckle down and won't want to get too involved because they want to protect their position. It's manipulative, and that's one of how they use these divisions, and whether they mean to or not, and I'm sure there is absolutely no malicious intention behind a lot of it, but you lean unconsciously and subconsciously into these power imbalances because they work for you in those different spaces. And there are really structural things that allow them to do that as well. So, for example, when you think about league tables and heat returns, staff-student ratios, for example, it's defined. A staff-student ratio is someone on an academic contract, the ratio of people on academic contracts to students, right? So you do not have to. Nobody cares about how many professional staff you have doing academic skills, how many librarians are doing teaching and learning. All of that's irrelevant to the statistics. So you can, that's where you could then look to remove it. So a lot of those sort of structural systemic challenges that we have around the way that the structures are kind of policed and organized, unfortunately, has these really negative effects where it allow, this sort of divide and rule kind of attitude. And it's not, as I said, I'm sure it's not a lot of the time intentional, but we lean into it because if you've got a giant organization, you don't really want them all kicking off at once. You don't want that, and some unions are more powerful than others. The UCU union has a louder voice. It's much more focused on HE. Professional staff generally belong to Unison, which is not specifically HE union, doesn't have the same relationship with its staff that some of the teaching unions do. And it's understanding that political context, I think, is really important because there's so much pressure then, particularly on professional staff, to not make a fuss, to not challenge, to not make things difficult because their job might be on the line. Their job is on the line anyway. Like a permanent contract is no security these days. So if you can be part of the change or you can have it done to you. And I prefer to sort of help and empower people and say, you want to be ahead of it or part of it. It's happening to you whether you like it or not otherwise. So try and have some influence and be part of it. And please don't heckle me in the streets if you don't agree with me.
I think that's great advice because there may be people listening thinking, I'm in these meetings right now and I'm not getting my voice heard or not having any dialogue whatsoever. And where can I go? Like, who can I go to right now to help get my voice heard? Peter, it sounds like you're a brilliant ally for professional services in the sector, and I'm sure at your institution as well. Where would you advise people going if they didn't feel like they were getting the space and time that they deserve?
I think the problem is universities are very slow to change, with a few other examples we could mention. And for me, it's all about making sure that you've got the right people at the top. If you haven't got people at the top who believe strongly in professional services and the integration of everybody into one university, actually, you're just going to be banging your head against a brick wall. I don't want to appear negative here, but if a organization does not want to change, it will not change. So actually, whatever we do is going to be irrelevant. Having said that, I firmly believe that there's green shoots of hope in this particular area, and there are universities doing some great things. I think the most important things are actually having visible ways of working together. So just as a very simple example, we made sure in the Faculty of Business and Law at Manchester Metropolitan University that it wasn't just academics who presented at conferences. It wasn't just academics who were eligible for grants and eligible for scholarships. So we do something called a associate scholars, where basically people can look at a particular area of a university with a view to making it better. It's something that lots of universities do, and it's a really good way of promoting it. Traditionally, it's been done by academics, but looking at the number of people who receive these associate scholars in the university, you've got a significant proportion of professional services who have been awarded these scholarships. That's in a little way putting them on equal footing to academics and allowing them to investigate things. So I think it's about getting these little wins, showing it works. And once you show things work, and once you've got structures in place, it becomes this sort of snowball effect. It does depend on those people at the top, though. If they don't believe in it, you're not going to go anywhere. But if they do, I think you've got the opportunity. But what I always stress is show impact, show what difference you're making. Yeah. And once you hit that sort of that magic moment of having some sort of impact, all of a sudden the barriers come down. And I think that's the way to do it.
Peter, I feel like that's excellent advice for us to actually end this conversation on, and for people to take on board and actually have those micro wins in their day to day. I'd be really keen to hear from our listeners. So if you are listening to this, we'd love to hear from you as to how you're driving change at your institution, or perhaps challenges that you're facing, and how perhaps you've influenced upwards to drive new ways of working and collaborating. But just want to say a massive thank you, Rachel, Peter, Louise. It's been a brilliant conversation, and I really hope this sparks many more conversations within our network and wider networks too. So thank
Will,
you.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for those listening. We'd love to hear from you, and hope to see you again soon on an upcoming webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.